What if everything you thought you knew about Hollywood's golden goddesses was a lie? Welcome to Classic Hollywood, the channel where we reveal the glitter and the grit behind cinema's most iconic legends. Today, we're diving into a side of old Hollywood that rarely makes it into the biographies or documentaries. This is 10 Golden Era actresses with shocking racist histories. A countdown that may change the way you look at these glamorous icons forever. Let's start with a name you probably revere. Number 1, Katharine Hepburn, the progressive paradox. She was a symbol of independence, a 4-time Oscar winner, a woman who wore pants in a world that wanted her in pearls and petticoats. Katharine Hepburn redefined what it meant to be a woman in Hollywood. Bold, headstrong, unapologetically herself. She challenged gender roles, refused to play the Hollywood good girl, and spoke her mind. At least when it came to women's issues. But when it came to race? The picture wasn't nearly as progressive. In 1967, Hepburn starred in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, a groundbreaking film for its time. It tackled interracial marriage just months before it was legalized nationwide in the US. The film was celebrated. Katharine was praised. The message seemed clear. But behind the scenes, the reality was far more uncomfortable. Multiple accounts from crew members and insiders suggest that Hepburn's attitude towards Sidney Poitier, her black co-star, was patronizing and distant. While there's no direct quote of racist language, those who were there describe a coolness, a discomfort that ran beneath the surface. She reportedly struggled to treat black colleagues with the same warmth and camaraderie she offered white peers. Even more telling is her complete lack of advocacy. During an era when celebrities like Harry Belafonte, Paul Newman, and even Marlon Brando were marching, funding, and speaking out for civil rights, Hepburn was largely silent. And silence in a time of injustice can be its own kind of betrayal. Was she just a product of her time? Or was she consciously avoiding political risk? Some defenders say she was private. Others say she believed in staying out of politics. But the truth is, when it mattered, when her platform could have really made a difference, Katharine Hepburn said little and did less. She challenged gender norms, but let racial hierarchies remain untouched. So, was she a feminist icon? Absolutely. But a progressive hero for all people? That's where the legend falters. In a career defined by fearless roles, her real-life reluctance to confront racism reveals a contradiction. A woman who was revolutionary for her time in some ways, but who also benefited from and upheld a system that marginalized others, and that's the paradox of Katharine Hepburn. Number 2, Joan Crawford, Hollywood's ice queen with a chilling reputation. She was elegance, power, control, a rags-to-riches legend who clawed her way to the top of Hollywood and never let go. But the same discipline and ambition that made Joan Crawford a household name may have masked something far darker. If you think Mommy Dearest told the whole story, think again. Joan's public persona was immaculate. The perfect lady, a survivor, the very embodiment of Hollywood glamour. But behind closed doors, those who worked with her, actors, staff, and insiders, tell another story. One rarely whispered in public, even decades later. Allegedly, Joan Crawford expressed discomfort with racial integration both on and off set. In private circles, she's said to have made derogatory remarks about Black, Hispanic, and Jewish colleagues. While these comments were never recorded in interviews or tabloids, likely due to the tight studio control of the era, several industry memoirs and tell-all books hint at a disturbing pattern. Some say she would avoid physical proximity to non-white crew members. Others claim she treated them as invisible. And according to behind-the-scenes reports, she often reinforced a racial hierarchy, making sure everyone knew their place, especially if they weren't white. Here's the twist. Crawford was operating in a time when fitting in with Hollywood's unspoken codes was essential for survival. For a woman who grew up poor and climbed the studio system ladder without a famous name or powerful family, maintaining control meant playing by the rules, even the ugly ones. Some biographers argue she conformed out of fear of losing her hard-earned place. Others suggest she fully embraced the prejudices of her era with chilling enthusiasm. But the most damning part? She never spoke out, not once. Not when the civil rights movement was sweeping the country, not when her contemporaries began to use their platforms for justice. Crawford chose silence, and in Hollywood, silence can be just as loud as a slur. So what does that leave us with? An icon, a legend, a woman who defied expectations, but who may have also quietly upheld the very barriers that kept so many out. Joan Crawford's legacy is razor-sharp, glamorous on the surface, but cutting underneath. Was she a woman shaped by a racist industry, or one who shaped herself into someone who upheld it? Maybe both. Number 3, Ginger Rogers, gliding through prejudice. She danced like a dream, elegant, flawless, untouchable. Paired with Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers became one half of the most iconic dance duo in film history. Her on-screen presence was all grace and charm. Audiences adored her, studios banked on her, and critics praised her. But beneath those polished routines and glittering gowns lies a part of her story that Hollywood never choreographed into the spotlight. Behind the scenes, Ginger Rogers' name has long been linked to quiet but troubling rumors of racism and resistance to change. Let's break it down. Rogers starred in films like Finian's Rainbow and The Story of Vernon and Irene Castle, both of which, even by the standards of the time, were criticized for racist portrayals of Black and Irish characters. Yet Rogers never distanced herself from these portrayals, nor did she challenge the messages embedded in the scripts. In fact, multiple behind-the-scenes accounts claim that Rogers was cold and dismissive toward non-white cast and crew. Extras and staffers, particularly Black workers, allegedly recalled how she kept her distance, avoided interaction, and, in some cases, objected to scenes that gave Black characters equal footing or dignity. It's said she even resisted working in integrated casts, reportedly raising concerns about how those scenes might affect her image, or the audience's perception. But was she actively racist, or just silently compliant in a racist system? That's the enduring question. Some defenders argue Rogers was simply cautious, that, like many women in Hollywood at the time, she had to play it safe to stay successful. Others believe she helped reinforce the industry's racial pecking order, choosing not to rock the boat as long as it kept her in the spotlight. What's clear is this: she never spoke up, never challenged Hollywood's systemic racism, never used her massive platform to uplift those who weren't already part of the club. Instead, she stayed in step with the status quo. Ginger Rogers may have glided across the screen with effortless grace, but off-screen, the silence and alleged resistance to equality reveal a legacy that's far more complicated than the Hollywood posters suggest. Sometimes the most powerful performers do the least when the spotlight turns to justice. Number 4, Vivien Leigh, the belle of the ball, and the Confederacy. She was magnetic, elegant, a 2-time Academy Award winner whose beauty and intensity captivated audiences around the world. But when we talk about Vivien Leigh, we can't avoid the towering shadow of Gone with the Wind, one of the most beloved and controversial films in Hollywood history. As Scarlett O'Hara, Leigh delivered a career-defining performance. But let's not forget what that role represented: a whitewashed, romanticized version of the Old South, complete with Confederate nostalgia and Black characters written as caricatures. Here's where it gets complicated and uncomfortable. Vivien Leigh didn't just play Scarlett, she embraced her. She became the face of a film that glorified slavery-era Southern life, and never once publicly questioned or criticized the story's racist foundation. In fact, during press tours and promotional events, Leigh reportedly doubled down on the genteel Southern image. There are stories of Black cast members like the trailblazing Hattie McDaniel being excluded from events, with no objection from Leigh. Some who were there described her as cold and dismissive toward non-white colleagues during public appearances, even as they were being marginalized or tokenized by the industry. And through it all, silence. Not a single word from Vivien Leigh about the racism in Gone with the Wind, or in Hollywood itself. Some say it was professional self-preservation, that she didn't want to rock the boat. Others argue she believed in the image she was selling. Either way, her refusal to speak out gave cover to a system that glorified oppression and helped immortalize a dangerous myth. Let's be honest, Gone with the Wind isn't just a movie, it's a cultural time capsule and a propaganda piece. And Vivien Leigh was its star, its symbol, and its most enduring ambassador. Her legacy as an actress remains untouchable, but her complicity in upholding Hollywood's racial mythology is impossible to ignore. Vivien Leigh didn't just blur the line between character and actress. She let the fiction of Scarlett O'Hara shape the reality of her silence. Number 5. Shirley Temple, America's sweetheart with a segregated stage. She was the face of hope during the Great Depression. That curly-haired bundle of charm, dimples, and tap shoes who danced into America's heart and stayed there for decades. But the story of Shirley Temple isn't all lollipops and lullabies. When you look beyond the cheerful songs and innocent smile, you find a legacy shaped by the racism of early Hollywood. A legacy she never truly reckoned with. Let's talk about the uncomfortable truth. Shirley Temple's most famous films, including The Littlest Rebel and Dimples, were built on deeply racist foundations. In these movies, black characters were almost always sidekicks, servants, or comic relief. Never equals, never leads, and never afforded dignity. One of her most notable co-stars was the legendary Bill Bojangles Robinson, a black tap-dancing icon. The two had great chemistry on screen, and even danced together hand in hand in what was considered a bold visual for the time. But here's the twist. Even these seemingly progressive moments were surrounded by scripts filled with offensive stereotypes and filmed within a system that kept Robinson in a box while pushing Temple to superstardom. Even more jarring, Temple once performed in blackface, a moment largely erased from public memory, but a powerful symbol of how normalized racism was in family entertainment of that era. As she grew older, Shirley Temple didn't exactly confront that past. In rare interviews, she defended her early roles as a product of their time, insisting they were harmless or well-intentioned. But what she didn't do was acknowledge how those films contributed to a harmful legacy, or use her platform to speak out for racial justice, even later in life. Was she responsible as a child? Of course not. But as an adult, with power and perspective, she could have said more. She didn't. Some say we shouldn't expect activism from a child star. Others argue that once she understood the impact of those images, staying silent became part of the problem. In the end, Shirley Temple's story reminds us of something vital. Even the most innocent faces in Hollywood history can be part of something far darker. And while the industry celebrated her for bringing joy during hard times, we can't ignore that her films and her silence also played a role in preserving harmful racial narratives for generations. Number 6. Bette Davis, the queen of the screen with a complicated legacy. Few stars from the Golden Age burned as brightly or fiercely as Bette Davis. She was a force, a trailblazer, an actress who didn't play by the rules and didn't care who she offended along the way. Known for her sharp tongue, intense performances, and refusal to be typecast, Davis became a symbol of empowerment for women on screen. But when it comes to the subject of race, her legacy becomes harder to praise and much harder to ignore. Let's be clear. There are no widely documented instances of Davis making explicitly racist remarks. Unlike some of her peers, she avoided the spotlight when it came to scandal and slurs. But that doesn't mean her record is spotless. Many of Davis's most famous films, including Jezebel and The Little Foxes, featured blatantly racist tropes and caricatures, with black characters pushed into the background or reduced to stereotypes. These weren't one-off examples, they were repeated images that reflected and reinforced Hollywood's systemic racism. So, what was Davis's role in all of this? Here's where the contradictions emerge. Some accounts from set crew and supporting actors describe Davis as aloof or indifferent to her black colleagues. Not outwardly hostile, but distant. Other stories suggest she showed moments of unexpected support, like reportedly advocating for black actor James Edwards to be included in a film, The Star, though the details remain debated. What's not debated? Davis rarely spoke up publicly about racial injustice. She didn't use her influence, now which was substantial, to push for equality in casting or storytelling. While she fiercely battled for better roles for women, her activism stopped there. Why? Some say she was pragmatic, protecting her image and staying focused on her own battles. Others argue that even someone as bold as Davis wasn't ready to challenge the deeper injustices of the system that made her a star. In the end, Bette Davis's legacy on race mirrors Hollywood itself, brilliant, complex, and filled with contradictions. She was ahead of her time in many ways, but on this issue she stayed frustratingly behind. A woman who took on studios, critics, and even co-stars with fearless energy. Yet when it came to racial equality, she often chose the path of least resistance. Number 7. Merle Oberon, the star who erased herself to fit in. She was exotic, enigmatic, radiant on screen. And yet Merle Oberon lived her life in hiding. Not from fame, not from scandal, but from her own identity. Born in India to an Indian mother and an Anglo father, Oberon had a background that would have instantly ended her Hollywood career if the truth came out. So what did she do? She passed for white and built her entire image on a lie carefully crafted by the studios. To the public, she was presented as a Tasmanian-born beauty with European roots. Her skin was lightened with makeup, her hairline raised surgically, and her entire backstory rewritten. Why? Because Hollywood didn't want a biracial leading lady, not even one as talented and striking as Oberon. It wasn't just studio pressure. Merle played along, never once acknowledging her Indian heritage publicly. In an era when a whisper of foreign blood could destroy a career, she chose to erase the truth to survive. And survive she did. She became the first woman of South Asian descent to be nominated for a Best Actress Oscar for The Dark Angel in 1935. But that milestone was never recognized as such because no one knew who she really was. And even more painful, she never used her position to speak out for other minorities, never advocated for inclusion, never pushed back against the very system that forced her into hiding. Some critics argue she was complicit in Hollywood's whitewashing, willingly reinforcing the idea that whiteness was the standard for beauty and success. Others see her as a victim of a cruel, racist machine, doing what she had to do in order to keep working. But one thing is certain, her greatest performance was off-screen, pretending to be someone she wasn't for an industry that demanded denial over truth. Merle Oberon's story isn't just about racism. It's about the psychological cost of survival in a system that offered no space for authenticity if your skin tone or family history didn't fit the mold. Her legacy is haunting. Because while she broke barriers in secret, the world only ever knew the edited version of her. And that speaks volumes about the kind of Hollywood she had to navigate. Number 8, Loretta Young, The Picture of Grace, and The Sound of Silence. She was the embodiment of 1940s virtue, soft-spoken, devoutly Catholic, always cast as the gentle heroine with a pure heart. But behind that haloed image, Loretta Young lived by a different Hollywood rule. Stay quiet, stay protected. Young's career spanned decades, and she became known not just for her beauty, but for her deeply religious values. She was one of the first actresses to bring her faith into her public persona, refusing to do risque scenes, staying away from tabloid scandals, and even hosting a primetime TV show where she delivered weekly moral lessons to the audience. But when it came to moral courage around race, the screen faded to black. Loretta Young starred in films that, like most of her era, marginalized or stereotyped people of color. Her stories centered around white perspectives, and characters of other races were relegated to servant roles, comic relief, or background noise. So did she ever speak out? Number: not once. There are no records of her advocating for civil rights, pushing for inclusion, or challenging the industry's racism. Her public voice, so often used to express religious conviction, was not used to defend those being excluded or demeaned by the very system she flourished in. Was that silence intentional? Was it fear or indifference? Some believe Loretta Young chose self-preservation. She had already navigated one of Hollywood's darkest personal scandals, secretly giving birth to a child fathered by Clark Gable, then raising the girl in secrecy. That trauma may have taught her that in Hollywood, survival meant silence. Others argue that Young, wrapped in a persona of goodness and grace, didn't see the racism around her as her fight to wage, a position that, in hindsight, feels both privileged and painfully disconnected. There are rumored private remarks that suggest outdated or conservative views on race, but nothing confirmed. And yet, that absence of confirmation isn't redemption. In a time when change was desperately needed, Loretta Young remained silent. And that silence helped preserve the system as it was. She wasn't overtly cruel, she wasn't scandalous, she just stood by. And sometimes that's the most damaging thing of all. A symbol of virtue in public, a bystander in private. Number 9. Rita Hayworth, the love goddess who had to disappear to be seen. She was sex appeal personified. The red lips, the wavy auburn hair, the sultry dance in Gilda that turned her into a global icon. But the Rita Hayworth the world fell in love with wasn't born. She was made. Born Margarita Carmen Cancino, the daughter of a Spanish father and an Irish-American mother, Hayworth was Latina, and proud of it. But in the 1930s and 40s Hollywood, that heritage was a liability, not an asset. And the studio system knew exactly what to do. They bleached her skin, electrolyzed her hairline to make it look less ethnic, changed her name, changed her voice, changed her entire identity. By the time Columbia Pictures was finished with her transformation, Rita Hayworth had become the all-American fantasy, a white star born from a Latina woman's erasure. She didn't just play white roles, like she was forbidden from being anything else. And throughout her career, Rita rarely, if ever, acknowledged her Spanish roots in public. She never spoke out against the process of whitewashing. She never demanded roles that reflected her heritage. Because in Hollywood's racist power structure, her very survival depended on pretending she wasn't who she was. So, was she complicit? Maybe. But more tragically, she was a victim of the same system she helped succeed. A system that rewarded assimilation and punished authenticity. One that made it clear, you can be famous, just not as yourself. Rita Hayworth didn't make racist remarks. She didn't exclude others. But her entire career is built on a painful truth. In order to be embraced by the industry, she had to erase the parts of herself it didn't want to see. That's not just a personal sacrifice, like it's a cultural tragedy. Because Rita could have been a symbol of representation. Instead, she became a symbol of Hollywood's ability to turn real people into palatable fantasies and leave the rest of them on the cutting room floor. Behind the love goddess image was a woman caught between stardom and self-erasure. Number 10. Jean Harlow, the platinum blonde who stayed quiet. She was the original blonde bombshell, the blueprint for every Hollywood siren that came after her. Jean Harlow oozed charisma. She was funny, bold, and unfiltered. A breath of scandalous fresh air during Hollywood's early sound era. Films like Dinner at 8 and Red Dust made her a superstar. But while Harlow broke sexual taboos and redefined femininity for the screen, she didn't touch the racial ones. Let's be clear, Jean Harlow wasn't known for making racist remarks. There are no infamous quotes, no reported outbursts. But what she did do, or rather what she didn't do, speaks volumes. In nearly every one of her films, black characters were cast only as maids, porters, or comic relief, and never as equals. The scripts were laced with casual racism that, while common for the time, remains painful to watch today. Harlow never challenged it. She never used her rising influence to push for better representation. never demanded more for the people standing behind her on set, often in servant uniforms or subservient roles. And while some stars at the time quietly supported civil rights causes or at least recognized the injustice around them, Harlow was silent. Was she protecting her career? Probably. Was she aware of the disparity? Almost certainly. Hollywood in the 1930s operated on an unwritten rule. White stars stayed in their lane, and that lane was built on the exclusion of others. Jean Harlow chose to stay in it. Some admirers argue she was a product of her time, young, naive, focused on making it big. But by the time she was a top-billed star, she had the power to say something. She didn't, and that's what makes her legacy complicated. Jean Harlow was groundbreaking in some ways, a woman unafraid of her sexuality, confident in her power. But when it came to confronting the racism embedded in the industry that made her famous, she remained firmly within the lines. So, while her image remains timeless, her silence speaks just as loudly. These 10 women lit up the screen, but behind the glamour was a system built on exclusion, silence, and survival. Some played along, some resisted quietly, others became symbols of a painful truth. Even Hollywood's brightest stars cast shadows. If this gave you a new perspective on classic cinema, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Which actress surprised you the most? Or should we do a part 2 on Golden Age actors? Because here at Classic Hollywood, we don't just celebrate the legends, we tell the whole story.